In most packs, an Omega's monthly cycle is a secret to be hidden or a burden to be endured. But when Aster was sold to the ruthless Alpha Vane to pay off a blood debt, he didn't find a master, he found a protector. Instead of a cage, he found a ritual. For the first time in history, an Alpha doesn't want to claim the red moon, he wants to worship it.
Welcome to another Bliss Tales video. Subscribe to my channel to keep these beautiful tales alive. New info, we have memberships and supers now where you can thank me and suggest new video ideas. Thanks for your support.
The northern territories were unforgiving. Snow fell like judgment, and the Iron Ridge pack ruled with claws sharpened on survival itself. Their Alpha, Vane, was known by many names. The Iron Wolf, the breaker of spines, the one who never kneels. His enemies whispered that he had no heart, only muscle and instinct. His allies knew better. They knew he simply had no room for weakness. And weakness, in the world of wolves, wore many faces. But none more despised than the face of an Omega. Aster had been born under a waning moon, marked from his first breath as something less than. Not quite man. Not quite woman. Something caught between beautiful, fragile, and cursed with biology that made him a commodity. In his pack, Omegas were traded like grain, married off to strengthen alliances, or worse, kept hidden like shameful secrets. Aster's family had gambled their fortune on a failed harvest, borrowed from the wrong Alpha, and when the debt came due, there was only one currency left to offer: him. The journey to Iron Ridge had taken 3 days. Aster was transported in a covered wagon, wrists bound not with rope but with his own resignation. He'd heard the stories. Vane didn't keep Omegas. He used them, bred them if they were lucky, and discarded them when their scent no longer pleased him. Aster had prepared himself for pain. He had not prepared himself for what came instead. The Iron Ridge fortress rose from the mountain like a scar in the earth. All black stone and frozen waterfalls. When Aster was brought before Vane, he kept his eyes on the ground. He had been taught that eye contact was defiance, and defiance earned only suffering. But Vane's voice, when it came, was not the growl he expected. "Look at me." Aster lifted his gaze slowly. The Alpha before him was massive, broad-shouldered and scarred, with silver eyes that seemed to cut through flesh and see the soul beneath. His dark hair was tied back, revealing a face too stern to be called handsome, but arresting in its severity. This was a man who had killed. This was a man who would kill again. And yet, when those silver eyes met Aster's amber ones, there was no cruelty, only assessment. "You're afraid," Vane said. It wasn't a question. Aster swallowed. "Wouldn't you be?" A flicker of something, amusement, respect, crossed the Alpha's face. "Your family's debt is paid. You belong to Iron Ridge now. To me. But you are not a prisoner, Aster. You are pack." The words should have been comforting. They felt like a different kind of trap. Aster was given quarters in the Western Tower, a room with a fireplace and furs thick enough to drown in. He was fed venison and root vegetables, given clothing that actually fit. The pack members watched him with curiosity rather than contempt. It was disorienting. Where was the cage? Where was the cruelty? Aster waited for the other blade to drop, for Vane to come in the night and take what he'd been purchased for. But Vane never came. Instead, he sent gifts. A cloak lined with rabbit fur. Boots that didn't let in the cold. Books, because somehow the Alpha had learned that Aster could read. And then, on the 5th night, when Aster's body began its monthly betrayal, when the cramps started like knives in his belly, and he locked himself in his room with shame burning hotter than pain, Vane knocked. "Go away," Aster managed through gritted teeth. "I can scent it," Vane said through the door. His voice was gentle, impossibly so. "The red moon. You don't have to hide it from me." Aster's breath caught. This was it. This was when the monster showed his face. He would be dragged out, forced to service the Alpha while bleeding, humiliated, broken. "I've brought you ironroot tea and heat wraps," Vane continued. "And valerian for the pain. May I come in?" The question shattered something in Aster's chest. "May I?" As if he had a choice. As if his body wasn't disgusting. As if he mattered. He opened the door. Vane entered with a tray, his enormous frame somehow careful in the small space. He set the tea on the bedside table, then knelt, beside the bed where Aster had curled into himself. The heat wraps were still warm, filled with herbs that smelled of earth and comfort. Vane's hands, scarred and capable of terrible violence, were gentle as they pressed the wrap to Aster's lower abdomen. In the old ways, Vane said quietly, before packs became obsessed with dominance and shame, the red moon was considered sacred, a time when omegas were closest to the moon's magic, when their bodies were doing the work of renewal. My grandmother taught me this. She said that any alpha who didn't honor it was no alpha at all, just a bully with sharp teeth. Aster stared at him, tears he didn't understand burning his eyes. You're not disgusted? Vane's silver gaze was steady. Why would I be disgusted by nature? By strength? You think this is weakness, Aster, but your body is preparing for life. That's the strongest magic there is. And there, in a stone room in the frozen north, with cramps tearing through him and an alpha kneeling at his bedside, Aster began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had been lied to his entire life. The ritual became routine. Every month, when Aster's scent shifted, when the pain began, Vane would appear. He would bring tea, wraps, soft foods. He would sit with Aster if company was wanted, or leave him in peace if solitude was preferred. He would cancel Aster's duties, forbid anyone from disturbing him, and once, when a visiting alpha made a cruel joke about that time of the month, Vane had broken the man's jaw so thoroughly, he couldn't speak for a week. The pack learned quickly. The Omega was not to be shamed. Not ever. But there were resistors. Old wolves who believed in the traditional ways, who saw Vane's tenderness as weakness. They whispered in corners, plotted in shadows. One of them, a scarred beta named Rorik, confronted Vane in the great hall during a pack gathering. You coddle him, Rorik snarled. You treat him like glass. The other packs are laughing at us, calling Iron Ridge soft. All because you won't discipline your Omega. Vane's response was a growl that shook the rafters. My Omega is pack. If you have issue with how I lead, challenge me. But if you ever speak of Aster with anything less than respect again, I will remove your tongue and feed it to the crows. Am I understood? Rorik submitted. They all did. Because Vane was still the Iron Wolf, still the breaker of spines. His mercy had limits, and his protection had teeth. Aster watched from the shadows, his heart doing something complicated and dangerous in his chest. This alpha, this supposedly ruthless man, was defending him. Not his body. Not his usefulness. Him. The softening happened slowly, like ice melting under persistent sun. Aster began to train with the warriors, proving he could fight despite what biology said he should be. Vane began to smile, rare, fleeting things that transformed his severe face into something almost beautiful. They talked late into the night, about books and battle strategies, about the weight of leadership and the ache of loneliness. And then came the night when talking wasn't enough. Aster's heat arrived like a storm, sudden and consuming. It wasn't like the red moon, wasn't about pain or renewal. This was pure need, biology calling for connection, for the bond that only a true mate could provide. Aster had suffered through heats before, locked in rooms, alone with his desperation. But this time, Vane scented it from across the fortress. This time, Vane came to him with intention. Aster. The alpha's voice was rough, strained. I can help you through this, but only if you want it. Only if you choose it. Aster was shaking, fever-hot and desperate. But through the haze, he understood what Vane was offering. Not ownership. Not transaction. Choice. I choose you, Aster whispered. I've been choosing you for months. What happened next was sacred. Vane carried Aster to the moon pool, a sacred hot spring deep in the mountain where ancient wolves had once made their mating bonds. The water steamed in the freezing air, lit by bioluminescent algae that glowed like captured stars. And there, under the open sky, they came together. Vane's touch was reverent, worshipful. Every kiss was a question. Every caress spoke of devotion. When they finally joined, it felt like coming home. Like every lonely night and every moment of fear had been leading to this. The connection between them deepened with each moment. Aster's heart soaring as Vane held him with strength tempered by tenderness, until the Omega felt tears of joy streaming down his face. And then came the knot. It was biology and magic intertwined. Vane's body swelling to lock them together in the most intimate of bonds. The Alpha's teeth found Aster's throat, not to wound but to mark, to claim. And when the bite came, Aster felt the soul bond snap into place like a key turning in a lock that had always been meant for them. They stayed locked together for nearly an hour, Vane holding Aster in the warm water, whispering promises and devotion. When they finally separated, there were marks on both of them that would never fade, proof of a mating recognized by the moon herself. 3 weeks later, Aster woke up vomiting. At first, he thought it was spoiled meat. Then he thought it was illness. But when his scent began to change, when Vane started hovering with an intensity that bordered on obsession, when the pack healer examined him and went very, very quiet, the truth became undeniable. Aster was pregnant. Male Omega pregnancies were rare, dangerous, and deeply controversial. The biological mechanisms were there. Omegas had the necessary internal structures, but carrying to term required perfect conditions, constant care, and luck that most didn't possess. Aster had seen Omegas die in childbirth. He'd seen babies born too early, too small, struggling for breath they'd never fully catch. Fear became his constant companion. But so did Vane. The Alpha transformed into something both terrifying and tender. He built a nest in their quarters, a massive construction of furs and soft fabrics that took up half the room. He monitored every bite Aster ate, every hour he slept. He carried him when Aster's back ached, massaged his swollen feet, held his hair when morning sickness became all-day sickness. The ruthless Alpha, the breaker of spines, had become a nesting, protective mate who growled at anyone who came too close. "You're being ridiculous," Aster said one evening, 6 months in, his belly round and heavy. "I went to the market. I didn't climb a mountain." Vane's eyes flashed. "You could have been jostled, hurt. Someone could have. Someone could have looked at me wrong and you would have started a war." Aster interrupted, but he was smiling. Because beneath the obsession was love so fierce it had its own gravity. Vane would burn the world down to keep their child safe, would raise forests and drain oceans, would kneel before gods and devils alike. The pregnancy progressed. Aster's body changed in ways that were both miraculous and exhausting. His hips widened, his chest became tender, preparing for milk that would come whether biology said it should or not. The healers monitored him constantly, amazed by how well he was carrying, how strong the baby's heartbeat sounded. But not everyone celebrated. The rival Blackwater pack had been watching Iron Ridge for weaknesses. Their alpha, a brutal wolf named Krieg, saw Vane's devotion to his pregnant mate as opportunity. He amassed forces at the border, sent raiding parties to test their defenses, waited for the moment when Vane would be too distracted to fight back. That moment came when Aster went into labor. It started with a tightening, a pressure that Aster initially mistook for the false contractions that had been plaguing him for weeks. But when his water broke, when the pain became regular and relentless, when the healers examined him and said, "It's time," everything else faded away. The labor lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of pain that rewrote Aster's understanding of suffering. Contractions that felt like his body was tearing itself apart. Vane stayed through all of it, letting Aster squeeze his hands hard enough to bruise, whispering encouragement, being the anchor when everything else was chaos. "You can do this," Vane murmured during a particularly brutal contraction. "You're the strongest person I know, Aster. Stronger than any warrior. You're bringing our daughter into the world. You're creating life." Daughter. They'd learned the sex weeks ago, had chosen a name together. Luna, for the moon that had blessed their union. The healers had warned that Aster might need surgery, that male anatomy sometimes couldn't handle the final push. But Aster's body, miracle that it was, knew what to do. When the urge to push came, when every instinct screamed at him to bear down, he did. He pushed through the burning, through the impossible pressure, through the moment when he was certain he would die from this. And then he heard crying. Not his own. A baby's cry, strong and furious and alive. "She's here," the healer announced, tears streaming down her weathered face. "She's perfect." Luna was placed on Aster's chest, still covered in blood and vernix, impossibly tiny and impossibly real. She had Vane's silver eyes and Aster's golden hair, and when she looked up at her father with those ancient, knowing eyes, Aster fell in love in a way that made his love for Vane seem like a rehearsal. Vane was crying. The Iron Wolf, the man who never showed weakness, had tears tracking down his scarred face as he touched his daughter's tiny hand with one massive finger. She gripped it immediately, and the sound Vane made, half sob, half laugh, was the most beautiful thing Aster had ever heard. But there was no time for peace. Word came even as Aster was being stitched up. Blackwater Pack was attacking. Krieg had waited for the birth, thinking Vane would be too overwhelmed to respond. He had miscalculated badly. Vane kissed Aster's forehead, kissed Luna's downy head, and then he stood. The tenderness fell away, replaced by something ancient and terrible. This was the Alpha who had earned his reputation. This was the Iron Wolf unleashed. "Stay with our family," he told his most trusted warriors. "If anyone gets through, kill them." Then he went to war. The battle was brutal and short. Vane fought like a creature possessed, his wolf form massive and merciless. He tore through Blackwater's forces with precision and rage, and when he finally faced Krieg, the fight lasted less than a minute. Vane's teeth found Krieg's throat, and the rival Alpha's blood stained the snow red. When Vane returned to the fortress, still covered in blood, still half wild with protective fury, he found Aster nursing Luna by the fire. The sight of his mate and child, safe and whole, brought him back to himself. He shifted to human form, cleaned himself with snow, and then joined them. "Is it done?" Aster asked quietly. "It's done. We're safe. All of us." Vane took Luna carefully, held her against his chest, and began to cry again, because she was so small, because she was theirs, because against every odd, every tradition that said Omegas were weak and pregnancy was impossible, they had created this perfect life. The pack gathered the next day. Vane stood before them, Luna in his arms, Aster at his side, still weak from birth but standing proud. There were new wolves there, refugees from Blackwater who had surrendered rather than die. There were old wolves who had doubted, who had whispered that Vane's mercy made him soft. None of them whispered now. "This is Luna," Vane announced, his voice carrying across the hall. "Daughter of Aster and Vane, first of her name, and every one of you will bow to her, not because she is my blood, but because she represents what we're going to become." He turned to Aster, and the look in his eyes was pure devotion. "For too long we've believed that strength is only teeth and claws, that biology determines worth, that Omegas should be ashamed of their bodies, of their cycles, of their capacity to create life. My mate has shown me the lie in that. Aster is stronger than any Alpha I've known. He carries our future in his very flesh. He bled and endured and brought forth a miracle." Vane knelt, still holding Luna, and the entire pack gasped. The Alpha who never kneels was kneeling now, not in submission but in reverence. "I kneel for the red moon," Vane said clearly. "I kneel for the body that renews itself. I kneel for the Omega who taught me that true strength isn't domination. It's creation. It's care. It's choosing love when hate is easier." He looked up at Aster, silver eyes bright with unshed tears. "I kneel for you, my heart, today and always." The pack knelt with him. Every warrior, every elder, every wolf who had ever doubted. They knelt before Aster, before the exhausted Omega still bleeding from birth, before the man who had been sold like property and transformed it into power. Aster felt tears streak down his face, but he was smiling, because he finally understood what Vane had known all along. This was never about being weak or strong, Omega or Alpha. It was about being seen, being valued, being loved for exactly what you were, biology and all. Luna began to fuss, and Aster took her from Vane, cradled her against his chest where she settled immediately. And there, in a hall full of kneeling wolves, with his mate rising to stand beside him and their daughter breathing softly between them, Aster finally felt like he belonged. The weeks turned to months. Luna grew strong and fierce, her laughter filling the fortress. Aster's body healed, though he carried the marks of pregnancy and birth with pride now. Proof of what he'd survived, what he'd created. His red moon returned, and every time it did, Vane was there with tea and heat wraps and the quiet assurance that Aster's body was not a curse but a gift. They shared their affection often, sometimes with passionate intensity, sometimes with the gentle comfort of complete trust. Vane learned every expression Aster made, every touch that brought comfort or joy, and Aster learned that the Iron Wolf's fiercest devotion was reserved for the quiet moments when they held each other close, when all pretense fell away and only their bond remained. One night, with Luna sleeping in her cradle and snow falling outside their window, Vane traced the mating mark on Aster's throat with reverent fingers. "I love this life with you. Do you remember how we met?" Vane asked quietly. "Being sold to me, leaving your old life." Aster considered the question seriously. He thought of his family who had traded him like livestock. He thought of the pack that had taught him shame. He thought of every moment before Vane when he'd believed he was worth less than nothing. "I do remember, and I bless the day I met you," Aster said finally. "Because you gave me something no one else ever did." "What's that?" "A choice. Every day you let me choose you. Choose this life. Choose to stay. And every day I do. Not because I'm bound by debt or biology or even the mating bond. But because I love you, Vane. Because you kneel during my red moon. Because you see me as strong when the world says I'm weak. Because you gave me Luna. Because you gave me myself." Vane kissed him then, slow and deep, a promise renewed. And as they held each other close, hearts beating in harmony, Aster thought about how much had changed. How a blood debt had become a love story. How a ruthless alpha had become the gentlest father. How an Omega's curse had become his greatest power. Luna stirred in her sleep, making soft baby sounds. Vane went to her immediately, scooping her up, rocking her with the same hands that had killed Krieg. The same hands that had held heat wraps to Aster's belly. The same hands that would protect their family with unrelenting ferocity. This was their life now. Not perfect because nothing ever was, but real, chosen, built on the radical idea that bodies weren't prisons, that biology wasn't destiny, that love, real love, honored every cycle, every scar, every imperfect truth. Years would pass. Luna would grow into a fierce young woman who refused to be defined by anyone's expectations. Aster would become an advisor to Vane, his tactical mind proving invaluable to the pack's success. They would have more children, each pregnancy a miracle, each birth a battle one. And every month, when the red moon rose, Vane would kneel, not because he had to, but because some rituals were worth keeping. Some loves were worth celebrating. And some truths, like the strength of an Omega's body, like the power of choosing tenderness in a brutal world, were worth defending with every breath. The Iron Ridge Pack would become legendary, not for their conquests, but for their revolution. Other packs would hear the story of Aster and Vane, of the Alpha who knelt and the Omega who stood tall, and they would begin to question their own traditions. Change would come slowly, painfully, but it would come. Because love, real love, had a way of transforming everything it touched. And it all started with a blood debt, a ruthless alpha, and an Omega brave enough to believe he deserved more than shame. It started with a man who was told his body was weakness, and an alpha who saw the truth. That creating life, renewing yourself monthly, carrying pain and still choosing joy, that was the strongest magic of all. That was worth kneeling for. That was worth everything. This is the story of Aster and Vane, proof that the fiercest love stories aren't about conquest. They're about reverence. About seeing someone's truth and honoring it. About kneeling not in submission, but in awe. Because when an alpha truly loves his omega, he doesn't just claim the body. He worships every cycle, every scar, every impossible beautiful truth. And that kind of love changes the world.
If you loved this video, show me some support by subscribing and clicking the notification bell.